I do like the message that it isn't like Snow White suddenly reaches this point in her physical maturity and now she's the most beautiful. Like, no, she becomes the most beautiful because she has confidence and she awakens to who she really wants to be. Hello, thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins. My name is Laura, and today I'm continuing my coverage of Snow White. I will be talking about the 2025 live action remake, and then once I'm done discussing that, I am going to move on to sharing my thoughts on the 90s version titled Snow White, A Tale of Terror. Last week, by the way, I made a video comparing the original Disney cartoon with the original Grimm brothers story, so if you have not yet watched that, I will link to it so you can check it out. But before I get into either one of the movies, I first wanted to mention a couple things about the original Grimm fairy tale, because in my previous video, what I say about the fairy tale is based off of the 1812 version of the story, which is the first version that the Grimm brothers wrote. And then through the decades, they made changes to it. And so in the original 1812 version, it is Snow White's birth mother who is the evil queen. And so in that video, I was saying, like, I assumed that Disney is the one who made the change to have it be the stepmother. But this actually is not true. The Grimm brothers themselves, in a later version, they had Snow White's mother die in childbirth, and it is the stepmother who is the evil queen. So the Grimms themselves made that change. And then another change they eventually made is how Snow White is revived, because in a later version, while the prince is having his servants bring Snow White in her coffin to the castle, one of the servants trips and this jostles the coffin, which then, dislodges the apple in Snow White's throat. So it happens on the way to the castle. So that is also a little different. And then one final thing is that in the 1812 version, I say that it's kind of vague as to the details as to who makes the metal shoes and when, and like the reasoning behind the queen wearing the metal shoes. But the Grimm brothers also explain that better in a later version. And they say that when the queen arrives at the wedding, when she and Snow White see each other, Snow White tells the prince about what the queen had done to Snow White, and so the prince has the shoes be made right then and there, and then the queen dances to her death, and once she is dead, Snow White and the prince continue with the wedding ceremony. And now on to the 2025 movie. This is directed by Mark Webb, and I don't know if this matters, but I wanted to start off by saying that this is my first time ever watching a Disney live action remake. I never had the desire to watch any of the past ones that have been made. So yeah, this is my very first one. And honestly, I kind of liked it. It wasn't, a fantastic movie, but I'll admit I did go in with low expectations because I was seeing a lot of people give it a low star rating on Letterboxd. I didn't actually read or watch any reviews because I didn't want other people's thoughts in my head. But I was seeing the low stars on Letterboxd, and so I went in with low expectations, and I ended up being pleasantly surprised. I, of course, do have my criticisms. For example, CGIing the dwarves was a big mistake, in my opinion, and I'm sure plenty of other people would agree. And also, one of the performances in particular was pretty bad, which I will get into, but I thought it had good pacing. I liked that they developed the romance between Snow White and the man who saves her with his kiss, and for the most part, I liked the added details to the plot, although admittedly, some of them were pretty cheesy at times. And then I was also surprised at how many new songs were written for this movie. And yeah, I enjoyed these new songs that were added. I will say, I do not think this is one that you need to see in theaters unless you just really, really want to, of course, but it is one I would recommend if you have at least mild interest. But I think you can wait until it is streaming, and I would probably end up giving it like 2.5 out of 5 stars. So it's not like this isn't going to be like a glowing review, but I also didn't hate it the way some other people seem to have. And now I'm going to move on to spoilers. So I am going to start off with a plot overview. So if you have already seen the movie and you know what happens, you can skip ahead to the next part of this video. But for those who haven't seen the movie, Snow White is a princess who is born in the midst of a snowstorm, and her mother survives childbirth. And so her parents are king and queen, and they raise her to be kind, honest, and a thoughtful leader. However, the mom eventually does die when Snow White is young, and then the dad is smitten with a beautiful woman who has magical powers. And I kind of got the impression that she cast a spell on him, and so he didn't truly fall in love with her, but, she used her ways to make him fall in love. And then he has to leave for political reasons. I forget why. But yeah, so he's out of the picture. And once he is gone is when the queen reveals reveals her true evil colors. And she forces Snow White to become a servant girl, and she turns farmers and blacksmiths and just like the random people of this town, this country, she has them form an army, and she turns their country into just a starving, fearful group. And then, as we know, the queen asks the magic mirror who is the most beautiful of them all, and when Snow White is older, it tells her that Snow White is the fairest of them all. And so she then tells her huntsman to kill Snow White, but he can't bring himself to do it and tells her to run into the forest where Snow White comes upon the house of the 7 dwarves. And so the dwarves help shelter her, and then while she is living with them in the forest, she also has multiple run-ins with this group of bandits that live in the woods. And one of these bandits is a guy named Jonathon, who she had met earlier in the castle, which I will get to in a minute. So yeah, she's spending time with the dwarves as well as this group of bandits. And then of course, eventually the queen shows up disguised as an old hag and gets Snow White to bite a poisoned apple, which puts her into a death sleep. And then the bandit, Jonathon, whom she had been falling in love with, he is able to make it to Snow White and he gives her a kiss. He doesn't know it will awake her. He just is like sadly giving her a goodbye kiss because he thinks she is dead. And this kiss, of course, awakens Snow White. And then she and Jonathon and the dwarfs and the bandits, they then go to the queen's castle and confront her. And Snow White can't bring herself to stoop to the queen's level. Like, she's not willing to kill the queen, but she wins over the people with her kindness. And so, like the guards, she wins them over with her kindness and the fact that she remembers them. And so the queen is enraged that she doesn't have her power over these people to tell them what to do. And so then she storms back inside the castle to her mirror, and the mirror tells her that she will never be more fair, more beautiful than Snow White, because Snow White's beauty comes from within. And this causes the queen to be angry, and she breaks the mirror, and this leads to her death. And then from here, we can assume that Snow White marries Jonathon, and the two of them restore the kingdom to the beautiful, happy place it once was. So to talk about Jonathon, so here, the man who saves Snow White with true love's kiss is not a prince, rather he is the leader of this group of bandits that lives in the woods. And Snow White first meets him when he is stealing potatoes from inside the castle because the people are starving and they're not given enough food. And then the queen catches him though, and so she has him tied up outside the castle and he would freeze to death. But Snow White shows up and she ends up saving him. Then they later meet again while she is living in the woods, and this is when their romance really begins to blossom. And then before the queen gives Snow White the apple, her guards are able to capture Jonathon. So then she has him down in like the dungeon jail basement of the castle. And the huntsman is also tied up down there. And so the huntsman helps out Jonathon, and both of them are able to escape, and so that is how he is able to get to Snow White. I did think she would be in her death sleep longer, like it felt like it didn't take long at all, so that seemed kind of quick. But anyway, I did like the added details to this character, and you know, this romance, they're not doing anything groundbreaking between Snow White and Jonathon, and a lot of it is definitely pretty cliche and cheesy. And yet, I can appreciate that at least they devoted more time to him and his relationship with Snow White, and I did like the songs they sang together. And yeah, I'm just happy they gave him more to do than the original cartoon did, or the original short story for that matter. Granted, this is called Snow White, so it is about her, not the prince, but still, considering true love's kiss is what saves her, like I want to feel the true love. And so I like that this version, you did feel that. And I did think the actors had good chemistry with each other. And I also like that when Snow White sings in the beginning of the movie, she has her song about a wish. And in the cartoon, her wish was all about like finding the man she loved, you know, like someday my prince will come, right, is the famous line. Whereas here, her song is about wishing like to do something more and wanting to be the type of woman her parents raised her to be. And so I did like that this song isn't about her like waiting around for true love. It's about her wanting to do something more in life. But then one last thing I wanted to say about Jonathon, I did want to mention a scene I thought was pretty funny, is when he tells her his name, he's like, my name is Jonathon, princess. You know, Jonathon, princess. But he realizes after he says it that it sounds like his name is Jonathon, princess. And so he's like, my name is Jonathon, princess. And then he's like, well, you know, it's Jonathon, not princess. Like it's this awkward moment where he's wanting to clarify that his last name isn't princess. I'm probably explaining it bad, but I thought it was a cute part of the movie. And now I have to talk about the evil queen because Disney cartoons always have such amazing villains. And in my last video, I talked about how much I loved the role of the queen, and I was so excited to see what they do with her here. And they do give her her own song, by the way, which was not in the cartoon. And while I liked the song, I unfortunately was not a fan of Gal Gadot in this role. Her performance just felt so fake, and like, I guess maybe like she was trying too hard, but she just was not believable. And then also the song, when she sings her song, you could totally tell she was lip syncing. And when anyone else was singing, it was seamless. But with her, like, it was very obvious that she was not singing live, to the point that it was kind of distracting. I did read that it was her real singing voice, and so I have no problem with that. Like, I think it sounded good. It was just her performance really took away from this character and from this song. And also, the person playing the evil queen, she should just be like eating up every scene she is in, right? And just really reveling in playing this vain evil queen. And yet that is not the vibe I was getting here. You know, she was definitely the weak link in the movie, and this really impacts the movie given how important her character is. And then also when she turns into the old hag, again in the cartoon, this character looks so creepy, even by today's standards. Although I will say, like, I first saw this movie when I was a kid, and the old witch, old hag really scared me, and so that will always forever live in my memories. Whereas here, I'm watching this for the first time as a grown adult, and there is nothing I can do to change that. And so there is part of me where I'm like, was the queen in the cartoon that scary as the witch? Or do I just think that because of my memories from when I saw this as a kid? Like, if I saw this 2025 movie as a child, would I have been as freaked out by her? I guess I will never know the answer to that, but if you took young children to see this movie, I would love to know how they responded to when she turns into like the old peddler woman. Like, were they scared of her? Because I get this is a kid's movie, and yet I still think they could have made her a bit creepier. Like she was in the cartoon, right? Like I said in my previous video, that movie is famous for scaring children when she turns into the old witch, you know? And so I wish they had made her creepier in this version. I also kind of missed not seeing her fall to her death like right away, because in the cartoon Snow White dies and then the queen is like, yes, I am now the fairest of them all, but it only lasts for a few minutes because then she is chased by the dwarves and she falls off a cliff and dies. So for a few minutes she gets to be the fairest of them all, but you just kind of realize how foolish her vanity was, right? And just how pointless her obsession is, because when she does get what she wants, it's so short-lived, right? And so you just realize how stupid she was to be so obsessed with this. And so I will say in the short story, the queen does live beyond that. And so them having her stay alive longer, it is true to the original story. But yeah, I kind of like in the cartoon how she dies right away. And then, don't worry, I will be getting to Snow White, but first I wanted to talk about the dwarfs. So in the new movie, they do not play as big a role here, and we don't get a feel for each of them like we do in the original cartoon. But honestly, I was okay with this because they instead chose to focus on the love interest, which I thought was a smart change. And also, because they were CGI, that just took away from them as characters for me. And so I also wasn't interested in seeing a ton of them since they weren't even played by real people. And I still don't fully understand their reasoning behind this. I read that they were influenced by Peter Dinklage, who is very against the stereotype that little people only play, you know, dwarfs and munchkins and these like magical people kind of a thing. And they aren't cast as just normal everyday people. And so he has spent his whole career fighting against that stigma and not taking roles like that, and how he feels like it sets people back to cast little people in these types of roles. And I mean, it's good Peter Dinklage has spent his career fighting against these stereotypes, these like casting stereotypes. And yet I'm sure there were also 7 people in Hollywood who would have loved to play these characters, right? And who would have been fine with it. And so I'm sort of like, I mean, should you be making this decision based on this one man? Like, it's not like he speaks for all little people, right? Again, I would love to hear your thoughts, but I wish they would have just cast real little people. Or, you know, Snow White Tale of Terror, the 7 dwarfs aren't even dwarfs. So I guess they could have gone that route too and just had it be 7 people in the forest or something, but maybe that would have been weird. I don't know. Anyway, I'm sort of conflicted because part of me is like, who am I to say what is or isn't offensive when it comes to something that I am not familiar with at all, right? Like, I am not a little person. I don't know anyone who is a little person, so I have no idea what they actually feel about this. But yeah, my opinion, it doesn't matter at all. But here I am sharing it, saying that I wish they would have cast real people in this. And anyway, I've probably gone on about that for a bit too long now. But anyway, share your thoughts on this down below in the comments, especially if you yourself are a little person or if you have a loved one who is, like, how do they feel about them CGIing the dwarves? And then also Dopey in this new movie, he does end up talking by the end. And we get this whole thing where the reason he doesn't talk is because he is mocked by the other dwarfs. And so he is scared to say something and be ridiculed for it. However, through knowing Snow White, he gains courage and confidence. And so by the end, he does talk. And it's this huge moment. And I could have done without this. I think Dopey in the cartoon is really cute. And it's funny too, because in the cartoon, she asks like, oh, can he not talk? And they're like, oh, we don't know. He's just never tried. And so I think he's cute in the cartoon, and I didn't feel it was necessary for him to have this character arc that he has here in the movie. And then I also wanted to mention how in the cartoon, Grumpy does not want Snow White there simply because she is a woman. And I know I got comments of people saying like it wasn't about her gender. It was about the fact that the queen was after her. And so she was putting their lives at risk. But even before he knows that, he is still against her being there because she is a woman, simply because of that. And we even get the line where he says, she's a female and all females are poison. They're full of wicked wiles. And when one of them asks, like, what are wicked wiles? He's like, I don't know, but I'm against them. And so clearly this isn't about her being the queen's daughter, the queen's stepdaughter. He's just against having a woman in the house. And so in the new movie, they get rid of that and they have Grumpy's reasoning be much more logical, kind of like what people were commenting about, where in the new movie, he just doesn't want her there because she is running away from the queen and her presence puts all of them at risk. But honestly, I kind of liked how in the cartoon they have so little interaction with women that Grumpy is full of all of these wrong ideas about them. And so, yeah, I thought that was kind of funny in the cartoon, and I did sort of miss seeing that here. And then also when she first arrives, she does not clean up the house like she does in the cartoon. And this too, this is like the original story. In the original story, the dwarfs were very neat and clean, so there was no cleaning to be done. However, we do get the whistle while you work song because at one point the dwarfs have a food fight, and so then they need to clean up after this. And that is when she sings the song with the dwarfs rather than singing it with the animals. And then the dwarfs also have a song of their own, which is Hi Ho, but longer with some added parts, extra lines, and yeah, this was fine. But now to move on to Snow White. So first of all, Rachel Zegler is fantastic. She is beautiful. She has the voice of an angel. And I am just going to kick things off and address the fact that other people, specifically those who consider themselves anti-woke, which is a phrase I hate. Like, I hate how I'm not even going to get into it, but plenty of people have complained about the fact that Snow White is supposed to have skin white as snow, and Rachel Zegler does not have skin white as snow. But in this version, they have her born in a snowstorm, and so that is why she is called Snow White. And honestly, that's good enough for me. Like, that's a good enough reason for her to have this name. And I thought she was great in the role. I really didn't have any complaints. I certainly had no complaints with her voice, but also her performance I thought was good. And I also love how the reason the mirror says that Snow White has become the fairest, aka the most beautiful, because, by the way, I know in today's day and age, we think of fair as being light-skinned, like the fairest person is like the lightest skinned, kind of is the assumption, I suppose. But fair, especially back in olden times, it just meant someone who was beautiful. But also back in olden times, people who were considered beautiful were ones who were pale. And so it sort of does have kind of a racist connotation in that sense, where light-skinned was more beautiful than dark-skinned. And so even when you think about it in that sense, like what it meant to be the fairest, like when you consider the fact that it did sort of have maybe a racist backstory, it also makes me fine with the fact that they didn't go out of their way to cast someone who was super pale. Because beauty doesn't have anything to do with skin color. And again, I think Zegler was a good casting choice. And so, feel free to share your thoughts down below in the comments. But yeah, anyway, so to talk about her being the fairest of them all, I did like that in this version, the moment the mirror changes and is like, oh, Snow White is now the most beautiful. It is when she has an awakening, thanks to having met Jonathon, and she risks her own life to save him from being locked outside the castle. And so I liked that it is a change within her that brings out the beauty. Same with the ending too, like her goodness is what makes her beautiful. And that is why the queen will never be the fairest of them all, because again, her insides are rotten, and so she will never be able to compare with Snow White's beauty. And so I like that the moment Snow White becomes the most beautiful, it is about something that is within her. And this is also true to real life, right? Like, I think a person's, like, it sounds so cheesy, but I do believe in like that inner beauty, and who a person is, it can shine through and it can make them appear even more beautiful or more handsome. Just like you might think someone is attractive, but then you get to know them and you're like, oh, like they kind of suck. And suddenly they become less attractive to you, you know? And so, yeah, again, as cheesy as it is, I do like the message that it isn't like Snow White suddenly reaches this point in her physical maturity and now she's the most beautiful. Like, no, she becomes the most beautiful because she has confidence and she awakens to who she really wants to be. And then I also like how they talk about being fair, as in being like a good person, like being fair as a leader. And so I like how they bring that interpretation of the word into the story as well. But throughout this movie, she is constantly talking about her dad, like how many times she says like, my father, ... whatever. It's so often she's just going on and on about my father. But again, we find out that he is dead. And so she keeps waiting for him, being like, oh, one day he'll return and he'll fix everything. But the prince kind of makes her realize, like, maybe you need to stop waiting around for someone else to do something and you need to do it yourself. And so again, I liked this message too, where, yeah, she just needed to take it into her own hands. And rather than waiting for someone else to show up and do it for her, by the end, she decides like, okay, like I am going to go and confront the queen and do it myself and stop waiting for someone else to do it for me. But yeah, basically all in all, I did enjoy this movie and I was surprised how much I liked it. Again, I gave it 2.5 stars, so it's not like it was incredible, but I did enjoy it and I would recommend you check it out for yourself once it is streaming. And now to move on to the 1997 movie, Snow White, A Tale of Terror. This is directed by Michael Cohen, and I watched this because a few people commented suggesting it, and I'd never heard of it before. But when I heard that it was a darker version of the story starring Sigourney Weaver, I knew I had to watch it, and I'm so glad I did because I did really enjoy this one. It's sort of marketed as being more faithful to the Grimm brothers' story, and there are a few things I will get into where it does call back to the original fairy tale, but they also definitely, make their own changes. And honestly, I was sort of surprised how similar to the 2025 movie plot is to this movie plot. I don't know if they were influenced by Snow White, A Tale of Terror, but there are a couple things that were pretty similar. But yeah, I thought there were some truly creepy moments, and Weaver is a far better queen than Gal Gadot. And like I said, the woman playing the queen should just be eating up every scene she's in, and that is certainly the case with Sigourney Weaver. And the crazier and the more unhinged the queen gets, like, she's just fantastic throughout all of it. But also here we see that the queen, we see how she became bad, you could say. And so this is a very different role than what we got in the 2025 movie. Because here, when she first meets Snow White, who in this version is called Lily, she tries to be nice to Lily and she's trying to be a good stepmother. But Lily is just a brat and makes life very difficult for the queen, whose name is Claudia. And so I just like how we get the backstory as to why the queen is so evil. And so yeah, if you enjoy scarier stuff, I definitely think this is worth checking out. And now I'm going to move on to spoilers. So the queen has a stillbirth. Claudia, she has a stillbirth 9 years after having married Lily's dad. And it seems like this happens, the pregnancy goes wrong because of the stress she feels due to Lily taking away a moment that was supposed to be Claudia's. Like, Lily kind of upstages her, and yet no one cares that Lily is ruining this moment and being rude. And Lily also just repeatedly is being disrespectful to Claudia, and through the years, this has taken a toll. And Claudia also feels that she is kind of living in the shadow of the king's former wife to some extent. And so after her son dies, this is kind of like the final straw the straw that broke the camel's back. Like it was the final moment that just pushed her over the edge. And she also has this wardrobe that had belonged to her mother, who we hear was hated, and we can assume she was a witch. And this wardrobe has a mirror inside, and we know this mirror has powers because it killed Lily's Nana early on. And then after the death of Claudia's son, she's looking, first of all, she just went through childbirth, and then not only that, the child was dead, and so she's just looking kind of haggard and not looking her best. And so she's very upset when she sees her reflection. And then this is when the mirror shows its true self, and we see this like beautified version of Claudia. And this is the evil mirror now talking to Claudia and influencing her. And she also has this servant guy who is also her brother. She has him go and get the body of her dead baby because she doesn't want them to get rid of it. And one thing, I don't know if I've talked about this on the channel, but one thing that I always find so disturbing and I have such a hard time watching is when people keep dead bodies around or like do stuff with dead bodies, even in comedies, for example. And it can be an animal or a human, because in the movie Envy, if you've seen that, the dead horse scene, I hate watching. I can't watch that part. The dead turtle scene in The Office cold opening that they have with Kevin, the frozen body in the coffin in Mr. Deeds that Adam Sandler is messing with. And then isn't there a National Lampoon movie where like the grandma dies and they have the grandma's body strapped to the car or something? And then obviously have a Weekend at Bernie's. And so all of these examples are from comedies. And yet even in these comedies, I find it so disturbing that I cannot watch them, or I cannot watch those scenes. And so if I can't handle it in a comedy, obviously I find it all the more disturbing in a horror movie. And so the stuff with her dead baby, I'm just like, oh, like it was just so, I find it so upsetting and gross. But anyway, so like the original fairy tale, when the guy brings back what she thinks are Lily's intestines, she then has them served for dinner and she eats them. And she also, in this version, she is like relishing this as she is eating it. And she's also trying to get her husband, Lily's dad, to eat as well. However, he gets distracted and he never does take a bite. But then the mirror ends up telling her that Lily is still alive. And like in the story, she tries 2 other methods to get her before finally going with the apple. Here, she tries to bury her alive while she is in the mine with the quote-unquote dwarves. And then later, she causes a storm that makes trees fall. And both times, the dwarves, they're not actually dwarves, but the men in the woods, one of them dies each time, but Lily lives. And so then finally, the queen resorts to turning into an old hag and tempting her with an apple. And also at this point in the story, Claudia, she has gone totally crazy. And she has also put a spell or something over the servants in the castle, and it was so eerie and unsettling because they almost seem dead, but they're not, and they're just kind of frozen. And yeah, it was very unsettling. But the king, he is alive, but he is injured, so he is kind of bedridden. And at one point, the mirror tells Claudia, like, hey, get like the sperm of your husband and it will bring your baby back to life, like his blood as well. And so she goes to the king. She doesn't kill him, but she gets his fluids to bring back her dead son. And we see the baby moving, and it's like, it's all swaddled up and we see it move, but it was Claudia who saw it move. And so I'm not sure if she does bring back the baby in this like undead kind of way, or if it was all just in her head. I'm not really sure, but she's carrying around this baby at different points, even though it's not alive. But anyway, Lily also has this gentleman doctor she is in love with, but while with the dwarves / this team of outlaws, she falls in love with one of them, and he is the one that lifts her dead body from the glass coffin thinking she is still alive, and he causes the apple to come out of her throat. And then Lily, the doctor, and this outlaw she loves then go to the castle, and the queen kills the doctor guy, and then Snow White has a showdown with Claudia. And like the 2025 movie, the mirror is broken, although here it is Lily that stabs it. And when Lily stabs the mirror, we see a stab wound in Claudia. And then from here, the mirror shatters and it kills the queen. Again, kind of similar to what happened in the 2025 movie. And then, yeah, Lily is reunited with her father, who is still alive, as well as the outlaw guy she is in love with. But yeah, I really like the spin they put on the magic mirror, and how also we see that the reason Claudia values her good looks are because it's almost like the only thing a woman has to offer. That and her ability to give birth to a son, right? And so when she starts to look bad, she freaks out because she feels like if she doesn't look good, the king will lose whatever little interest he still has in her. And I did read that Sigourney Weaver was interested in this role because she wanted to show the backstory as to why this queen turned evil, right? And give her more dimension and more depth. And I did think that worked really well, and I really enjoyed this backstory they gave her. But the mirror, again, this was from her mother, and clearly it has bad magic going on. And so when Claudia has this moment of severe weakness, understandably so, given her baby has died, this presented an opportunity for the mirror spirit to, swoop in and possess her in a way. And then I wanted to mention the dwarves because they're not dwarfs at all. They're just regular men. And this is definitely a darker take on them as well, because when they first see her, they talk about killing her. They talk about holding her for ransom. One of them even tries to rape her. However, that one ends up being kicked out. I guess he is like the grumpy in the group. But then, of course, once they get rid of that guy, she slowly but surely forms a bond with all of these men, and then she even falls in love with one of them. But the fact that they are a group of outlaws also reminded me of the 2025 movie. But yeah, I guess those are the highlights of this one that I wanted to talk about. Also, by the way, the father is played by Sam Neill, who I just watched in Jurassic Park, so it was cool to see him in this too. But yeah, again, I really enjoyed this one. I would definitely recommend it. I would give it 3 out of 5 stars. So I was tempted to give it 3.5, so it's somewhere around there. And when Sigourney Weaver is dressed up as the old hag, I thought she looked really creepy. And then also there's a moment when Snow White confronts her, Lily, and she looks like Sigourney Weaver, but with the teeth of the old hag. And that was also really creepy. And so that was a really great scene. But yeah, anyway, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.